So for those of you that weren't here for part one, my name is Jamie Kuhl, Program Manager at Microsoft and the Silverlight team. In part one, we got started with using a Silverlight application in .NET. Nick came up and built some UI for us. What we're going to do in this session is all the things that go below the UI. Networking, XML, web services, working with data with the new link feature, how you interoperate between the HTML DOM and your managed code. If I think you've all been an attentive audience, maybe we'll even do a little bit of Mac debugging. We'll talk about the other features that are coming up in other talks, and then we'll close it out with Q&A. So, our first topic, networking and XML. So almost any application that's running in the browser is going to need to talk back to the server in some form. And there are different ways to go about doing that. The simplest, would be being able to make HTTP calls, maybe a REST-style web service, what have you. Maybe you're just downloading an XML file, but you make that call, and then you get back XML data. Then you need to parse the XML data, do whatever you need to, maybe build up an XML response and send it back. So let's talk about that scenario first. As you may imagine, Silverlight with .NET has a networking stack. We have a browser-based HTTP networking stack. And what that means is that all of our requests for HTTP access go through the browser's networking stack. So any type of cookies, any type of session information that you may have set up in the HTML page will be passed along with the request. Now, if you've used .NET before, you would be familiar with the HTTP web request class. We effectively have that same class, except now it's called the browser HTTP web request. Same class, same interface, different implementation to go through the browser's networking stack. To use this, pretty much you say, hey, here's the URL that I want to access. So in this case, we're downloading an XML file. You create your HTTP web request object, and then you call the response to actually make the web request. And then there's a number of ways to read the response. In this example, we're just using the stream reader to get the raw response to the request. Now, in the alpha that's available today, all of these calls are restricted to the same domain. Same domain access is a fundamental principle of the sandbox that these run in. We are working on providing cross-domain support in a safe way as part of our roadmap. But for right now, all of this is same domain, which means if you need to call or access a resource on a different server, you're going to need to proxy that through the server that you came from. Now, again, not surprising, we also have XML support. Now, we don't have the full XML support that's in the framework today. We don't have support for things like XPath or things like XSD validation, but we have the core XML reading and writing capability. This was part of our effort to go refactor down, make the package as small as possible, and let you do what you need. So to use this, the code should be familiar if you've used the XML reader in the framework today. You create your XML reader, you pass in the string or the stream, and then you just go about iterating over it, searching the nodes, popping off element or attribute values, seeking to the next one, and just repeating until you've parsed the entire XML file. When we talk about linking a little bit, I'll talk about Xlink, which is what we believe our future rapid application development, very easy mechanism of doing XML querying and searching is. All right, so let's just go ahead and jump to a demo. So we've got the project that we were working on in the last section. So let's just go ahead and run this real quick so we can see it. So we have our list of fantasy baseball, and I have here some very, very temporary data I've plugged in to make it obvious as we switch over to the real stuff. So what we're going to do now that we have this chart with its UI is we're going to go ahead and download an XML file that contains a list of player data. So I have a list of XML data here, just a big XML file. We're going to download this XML file, parse it, and plug it into our application. So to do that, we're going to go back to Visual Studio. And our project is C#, and I could just go ahead and start writing this. But one of the powers of the framework is that I can use whatever language I want. So in this case, we're going to do the download of the file in VB. So I'm going to go ahead and, in our solution, add a new project. And we'll make this a Visual Basic Silverlight class library. And we'll just call this the VB utility library. And this will add a new project, a new DLL to our application. It's in VB. So now we're just going to write a little downloader class to our utility library. And to do this, we're going to need a few new namespaces. The System Windows Browser namespace is a new namespace in Silverlight. This namespace has a number of things we're going to be talking about, including some of the new networking support, as well as the HTML integration stack that we'll get to later. And we'll just call this the downloader class. And for expediency, we'll just go ahead and import the actual function. And all this function is, it's a download XML function. You pass it in a file path, and it gives you a string as the result. And then all it's doing is newing up a browser HTTP web request, taking the file path that we want to download. We come down here, we call the request.response, which sends the request, gets the response back. Then we use the stream reader to actually read the response and send it back. So, the 4 lines of code to do core HTTP networking, we've got encapsulated here in our VB function. Let's go ahead and build this to make sure everything is still building good as we go through here. And now what we can do is we can go back to our C# file and consume this. So to do that, we're just going to go to our Fantasy Baseball project and add a reference. And again, for you .NET guys, this should all look very familiar. And we'll add a reference to our VB utility library. And then we're just going to comment out this line where we're generating fake player data, because we're going to be plugging in real data. And then we're just going to go string.result. And we're going to call our VB utility library.downloader. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, we should probably new the thing up. So how about we go VB utility library.downloader. We'll make a downloader. All right, so we've newed up our class, and now we're going to go ahead and call our download method. There we go. Download XML. And then we're just going to pass in the path that we want to download. So I'm just going to go get our app root URL and add on the name of the file, playerdata.xml. All right, so that should download our file. And just to make sure it's working, we're going to go ahead and put a breakpoint here in our VB code, hit F5. All the projects will be compiled. The browser should start up. And even though my application is a C# application, because I'm calling into the VB project, I'm hitting a breakpoint in VB. And now I can just step through this, make sure everything seems to be going well, seems to be reading it just fine. And I'm going to step back out into the C# code and see that I've downloaded the result string. We can go make sure it's good by hovering over it, expanding it out. And you can see we've got a big list of XML files, a string that we've just downloaded. All right, so that's step 1. So now what we've got to do is we've got to parse this XML file so that we can actually consume it. So we'll stop the debugger. And now we're just going to go ahead and add a function to download this guy. And I know that no one wants to watch me actually download, actually write the code to parse an XML file. But basically, we have a function here, takes a string, XML data that we just got, and it's going to give us back a list of players. And then it creates our XML reader code XML reader, reads the first player, pops off all the attributes that have the XML data, puts them in a player object, adds the player object to the collection, and just keeps iterating over it until we're done with the XML file. Pretty straightforward XML reading and writing class type of semantics. So now that I've added this, to make this thing actually work, all I have to go do, add one line here, which is to say, hey, our actual list of players equals our parse XML to players, and we'll pass in the result. There we go. So now if I run this, and I'll get a breakpoint in VB, I think, because I didn't clear it. We actually downloaded the real XML file, parsed it, and plugged it into our grid. Very straightforward, very easy. Now, this is the first type of networking that you can go do. This is kind of closer to the metal stuff. We'd like to make it easier to do that. So let's talk about web services. So Silverlight has very good web services, and this is another area where we're continuing to invest and improve. So what this means is that we have support for calling web services within a Silverlight project, just like you can in a .NET application. Specifically in the alpha, we have support for JSON serialization. JSON, as I'm sure most of you are aware, is the object format for JavaScript. So what you can go do is we have a JSON serializer in Silverlight. That means that we can translate between managed objects and JSON objects that we pass across the wire. So we combine this with a proxy generator in Visual Studio. So when we go do add web reference, the proxy generator will create a class for us that's strongly typed, very easy to program against, that will do the conversion between the managed objects to the JSON objects for passing across the wire, calling the web service, and giving us the response back. We're working on adding additional support for things like SOAP support. We can also already call WCF support. WCF is the Windows Communication Foundation. It's where the new major investments are going for web services with a whole set of new features on the back end for more powerful types of web services. You can consume those in Silverlight applications today. So basically in this example, we have a web method that we've defined on the server. And now to call that web method, we just create the web service name and then call the method name directly. There's no networking involved. There's no other kind of hard code you have to go write. We also have async support. So you can call a web service today asynchronously. All the right things will happen on the right thread so that when you get the call back, it's on the UI thread. So you can just start partying on the UI immediately. We are adding support for more general purpose RAD async support in the future. And what that means is if you've used the framework today, there's a class called background worker. That and a number of other concepts are all about making it so that you can write async code that doesn't block your UI, it doesn't hang your browser when you're doing complex stuff or things that could take a long time. And to write that, you don't have to be a threading expert and deal with mutexes and locks and all that kind of stuff, because we take care of encapsulating all of that for you. So that's where we're going with async support. In the alpha, we have support only for calling network requests asynchronously and kind of lower level to the metal system.threading type of async processing. So let's go ahead and look at an example. So if we go back to our project, what we're going to do is instead of downloading an XML file, we're going to be calling a web service. So we've got a web service here that was written on ASP.NET, and it's got a method called getPlayerList. And when we call it, it's basically giving the XML format back, the XML data back in a web service form. So here we have, it's coming back, big list of player data. So that's what we're going to call. So to do that, we're going to go into Visual Studio, and we'll go to our XAML CS file, and we're just going to get rid of the code where we just downloaded the XML file, because we're going to replace that with web service call. And we're going to go to our project, and let's just get rid of this, actually. And then what we're going to do is add web reference. And right here, we can go navigate and find any general purpose web service, but this web service happens to already be in our project. So I can just come in here and say web service is in the solution. And I actually have two versions of the web service, an ASMX web service and an SVC service. The SVC service is the WCF type of web service. I could pick either one, call either one. I'll start out calling an ASMX web service. And this is going to find it, and I'll just go ahead and click Add Reference. And this will create all the strongly typed proxy classes for us. So we turn on Show All Files. We can actually navigate down here, look at the files that were generated, and see that it generated this, this fantasy baseball baseball data class that takes care of all of the serialization encapsulation for us. So to use this, I can just go back to our code file, and let's just declare our web service class. So we'll just declare a private localhost.baseball.data. We'll call this baseball data, and we'll new up our web service. Very straightforward. And now to call this guy, I can replace those 3 lines of code and those several functions of downloading and parsing XML with basically 1 line of code, which is players equals, and then we'll just call getPlayerList, which is our actual web service method. And then that returns back an array, so we'll just convert that to a list. This is actually one of the things I love about the framework. There are so many advanced concepts now, generics, rich collection classes, anonymous variables, things that make doing this type of programming really, really easy. So now I can hit F5, run this thing, and this time it should run and give us data back from the web service. It's thinking for a minute, and there it comes back from a web service. Now, it did seem like it was taking a long time for that web service to come back. Yeah, definitely taking a long time. We're going to have to go figure out what's going on here. So let's go into our project and actually look at the web service itself. So here is our web service method. Let me just see if I can figure out what's going on and see if we can fix anything. All right, well, this looks good to me. So I think the only thing that we're going to be able to do is call this thing asynchronously. So to do that, let's get rid of our synchronous call. And what we're going to do, let's make it even more interesting. Let's take our web service and let's switch it, the URL, from the ASMX web service we were calling. Let's actually change this to be the SVC web services. So the cool thing about this is the proxy that I generated before is going to work exactly the same with both types of web services. All right. So now we set that. Now I just need to call this thing asynchronously. So to do that, I'm just going to go and call, instead of get player list, begin get player list. This is going to start the asynchronous call, return immediately, and let the execution keep going. Now what I need to pass into this is an actual async callback, basically a pointer to the method that should be called when the async request completes. So in this case, we'll just call, and we'll create a new method called load completed. And then you can pass state back and forth, so you can track what web service call is being made. In this case, we're just making one. We don't need to do that. The other thing that I'm going to do is, because this is an async web request, I want to show some progress as this is going through. In the last session, Nick made a little spinner thing. So let's go ahead and start the spinner when we make this call. So this will start the request. What we've got to actually do is do something when it comes back. So let's come down here, and we're going to add in a handler. So I think I called this function load completed, didn't I? So this gets fired when the thing gets done. And all this is doing is calling end get player list to get back the actual results of the web service call. And then I'm just putting those results into my table and closing the progress. And there's a few lines of code down here to fix up the nav bar that Nick built as well. So now if we run this, our app will start up. And this time, we actually get spinning progress UI as it's downloaded. And it's going to come back. Yes, all right. Let's do it again. Apparently, we were spinning up the SVC server because it wasn't going. There we go. So there we have async web services in our Silverlight application. You know, the cool thing is it's doing that big operation. But while it's doing that, the browser's not hung. It's responsive. I can do whatever I need to. Right? That's the cool thing about that. OK. So now we've got some data back. We have our data in some nice objects that we can work with. The next thing that we want to be able to do with this is actually start to work with it. But there's actually one note that I want to talk before we move on from this. Silverlight on the server. So I just showed you calling ASP.NET-based web services. Silverlight works with any server. In terms of putting the content on it, .NET hasn't changed anything about that. To run the Silverlight application, it's just some files you put up on your web server. They could be Apache on Linux. It doesn't matter. The web service stack, right? Again, this is just standard stuff, HTTP, XML, JSON serialization. We're going to be adding SOAP and other serialization formats. Any server that supports that, this will work fine with. Now, that said, we are doing some investment to make ASP.NET and Silverlight work great together. You saw some of that when I was able to easily drag and drop Silverlight content onto an ASP.NET form. We have similar support for adding video content based on Silverlight to your ASP.NET application. There's a set of these types of things that are available as part of the ASP.NET Futures Preview, which you can download off of Silverlight.net today. So this is just also the start of the integration between ASP.NET and Silverlight. There's a number of other integration points that are coming down the pipe. And there's actually a couple sessions that'll go into more depth about that integration points that I'll point you at the end of the talk. Okay, so we got some data. Now we want to work with it. So link is the first data feature that we've put into Silverlight. So what is link? Link is called language integrated query, but what actually is it? And why should you care about it? Well, how many people out there have been querying a SQL database and you've written your select statement, select star from players where this is true, order by, group by, joins, right? And you build it up and you get it kind of working, and then you need to do another join or something, you put it in, and it doesn't quite work right, and you're just like, okay, where in this big string did I go wrong, right? Or you've been trying to parse an XML file, and you did a big XPath expression, and somewhere you got a slash wrong, right? And it's not giving you back the right values, and you're like, okay, how do I fix this problem? So link is basically building that type of query support into a programming language. So C# and VB, things like the select, where, order by statements are all first-class language citizens in the language. That means that when you're writing that expression, you can get IntelliSense. That means when you screw something up with it, you actually get a compile time error, and you can go about fixing it, right? And all that type of integrated support. So link gives you the ability to do that on really anything that is IEnumerable. So any collection, right? Which almost anything that's a list of things in managed code is enumerable. So you can do this query on a list of things. So in this case, we're actually doing a query, and it looks very SQL-y, but we're doing this, and everything that's kind of that light blue color is an actual C# keyword in this case. And it's very easy to write, very powerful. What we have in the alpha today is the core link for going against IEnumerable objects. There's also something called Xlink, which is link targeted specifically at XML, and D-link, which is link targeted specifically at relational data. These are roadmap technologies for us that we're planning to bring into the Silverlight product at the right time. So let's go look at link in action. It's easy to understand if we actually play around with it. So what I'd like to be able to do in my application is take this big list of data and do some filters on it. Let's say that we wanted to filter it down to only players that have at least so many home runs. So we're going to go ahead and build a function here, and we'll just make this a private function, and we want it to return a list of players, and we'll call this filter players by home run, and it'll just take an int. So now I'm going to use another cool C# feature, anonymous variables, and we'll just make a filtered players variable, and we're going to go make a link statement. So I'm going to go from, you notice I'm getting IntelliSense the whole way along here, from p in players. Players is our big list of players. Let's do a where p dot home runs is greater than the home run variable that we just passed in. That'll filter it down to what we want. Now let's go ahead and sort it. And let me tell you, if I didn't have IntelliSense right now, I would be lost. So p dot home runs. And let's make this descending so we get most home runs to least. So we'll just call that descending. And then let's give it back all of the players. So we'll just select P. So this basically means give me, for every player that meets this criteria, give me back the entire player object. We could manipulate the object before we gave it back, and give it back to me in a sorted list. And then all I got to do is say return this filtered players, and we'll just convert this to our list. There we go. So now to call this, let's just go ahead and test this function out once. So in our load completed event, once we just got back all the players, we'll just call chart.data equals filtered players by home run, and let's say 40 home runs. Anybody have any guesses for how many players had 40 or more home runs in 2006? 6. Those are actually pretty good guesses. Oh, good catch. I don't want them to win, though, so. Yeah, see, there's way more than 6. You guys didn't have that right. Asynchronously loading our data here. And it was 7. I'm sorry, 7. Okay. Now we've got it filtered. Let's do something a little bit cooler, though. What would be really nice is if I had a slider where I could just kind of slide the home run value and have that filter apply. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's get rid of our little hack here. And let's add a slider to our UI. So let's go to our XAML file. And let's just go down here. You can see here's our chart control. I'm just going to go ahead and plug in a slider. Yep, so there we have a new UI controller slider. It's name slider. It's got all the size set for it. Go back to our C# file. And let's just come up here. And let's set a few properties on the slider. Let's drag in a little bit of config on it. Let's just build and make sure we're happy. There we go. Now we're just going to hook up on the slider our value changed event. So this event will be fired every time the value of the slider changes. And again, thank goodness for IntelliSense. So here's our slider value changed event. So all I'm going to do here is that line of code that we wrote before. We'll call that again. Except the difference is we'll pass in the slider.value. Whatever the values of the slider is what we're going to filter on. And I think we have doubles and ints going on here, so let's convert this to an int. And now let's try it. So here we have a slider control. So now what I can go do is I can go filter our data with just a few lines of code. And you can see that if I drag it up for a little bit more, uh-oh. What went wrong? I remember this bug. I remember this. Yeah, so Nick, it turns out if your next page, previous page doesn't get it updated, then the chart also has a little bit of issue, minor issue. There we go. So now we can filter it based on home runs. And you can see the home run column right here is actually sorted in the right sort. So we go from most home runs to least home runs. And you get basic data querying with LINQ with just a few lines of code. And the cool thing about LINQ for me is that this is the one of the big new features we're working on in the next version of the .NET Framework in Visual Studio. We didn't have this a year ago, right? This is just the type of investment that we're doing in the developer division to make developers' lives easier. And the right set of those, we're pulling those from the .NET Framework product into the Silverlight version of .NET Framework as well. And we'll continue to do that. So all the new innovations that we get for the full framework, we'll be pulling into Silverlight. Okay. Let's talk about HTML integration. So in all likelihood, you're not going to be building applications that are entirely managed. You're going to be plugging your managed code into a web page, and you're going to have scenarios where you're going to want to talk back and forth between the web page and the managed code. So we have a rich set of support in Silverlight for doing that type of talking back and forth. So there's two scenarios. The first is being able to access the HTML DOM from managed code. So we can do this via a new namespace, the system windows.browser namespace. And inside of that namespace, we have a mini wrapper of the DOM. Now, I'll say mini wrapper, and what I mean by that is that we have direct, strongly typed wrappers for some of the common operations that you're going to want to be able to do, like navigate the URL. We also have more abstract, loosely typed implementations for other things. So if you want to be able to read properties or call methods or hook up events, you can do that for really anything in the DOM, but you do that via some of the code at the bottom, which is, hey, I want to attach to the event named onClick in the DOM. And then we'll find the event called onClick for that particular element in the DOM and hook that up. Same thing with methods, same thing with properties. So you can see examples of that here. The HTML page class is a static class that's the root class for accessing the DOM. everything and all the instances for getting access to elements are based off of that. So here I'm getting access to our server root. I'm calling and having the browser navigate. And at the bottom, I'm actually going ahead and hooking up an event from the HTML DOM. The other scenario is being able to access managed code from HTML. So in this case, you may have a Silverlight-based chart or control that you want to derive from JavaScript. So that can expose out some properties, methods, or events that you can then access from JavaScript. And doing this is very easy. Basically, all you have to go do is in your managed code, whatever you want made accessible, you put the scriptable attribute on it. Then you register the object that should be accessible to JavaScript. And then you can go code directly against that from your JavaScript DOM. So if you want to keep your HTML UI, but you like, hey, being able to do all of my networking or being able to parse XML or anything like that in managed code, you could go light a library that does that and access it via the HTML, via the bridge if you wanted to. Or you could have that rich chart control that you just want to go derive from JavaScript. So the other class of scenarios that's interesting in the HTML integration space is being able to make your Silverlight application feel more like a part of the browser. So what that means are things like forward back. As you're moving through your application, instead of having the back button navigate you away from your Silverlight application, you may want that to actually just navigate you to the last step that you were in the Silverlight application. Same thing with persistent links. As you're navigating through your Silverlight application, you may want the address bar to change so that at any point the user can copy and paste that, email to someone, and when they click that link, it won't only just open your application, it'll open it to the state it was in when the user cut and paste that link. So the HTML bridge lets you do those types of scenarios as well. One note, in the alpha, we have support only for marshalling across between the managed and HTML boundaries, simple types, ints, strings, things like that. Complex types, which means arbitrary managed objects, is also something that's on our roadmap for support. Okay, so let's go play around with HTML integration. So what I want to be able to do in our app is actually plug in a text box where I can type in some values and then search on my data. So I want to search for player name. That's what I want to go build. Now, it turns out, like Nick was talking about earlier, rich text input, text boxes, those types of things, those controls we don't have yet as part of the alpha. Those are also part of our roadmap. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to leverage the HTML text box for this scenario, use interop between the two to go drive my Silverlight application. So to do that, what I'm going to do is go back to our C# file here, and I'm going to add in a function which is going to do what we basically just did, where I'm going to filter the players, except I'm filtering instead on home runs, I'm going to filter on where the name contains the name that I'm passing in. And then it's just going to do the work to set up the chart, set up the nav bar. So this is a self-contained function that will now do a search on my application. What I want to do now is expose this out to JavaScript. To do that, all I have to do is go add the scriptable attribute to this guy. And then I also need to add the scriptable attributes to the class that I want to make available. Then the last thing I've got to go do is register this thing. So all Silverlight applications have a web application object. The web application is kind of a root application object for application-wide features. And right now, it has a few things on it, like being able to register scriptable objects. So registering the scriptable objects, this will basically say, what object in managed code do I want to make accessible to script? And what name do I want the script to associate with it? So in this case, we'll call it the baseball data object. And we'll actually make it map to this object in managed code. So now I can go over to our website, open up the default ASPX page for our site, and then we'll just come down here and we'll insert a little bit of HTML. So this HTML is basically just a text box and a button. You can switch over to design view. And you can see I've got a text box and a button down here in my application. If we go back to source, then what we want to do is, you see when the button is clicked, it calls an on search method. So we'll go ahead and add that guy in. So we'll just add a script block with our search method defined. And then all this is going to do is get our text box and then get our Silverlight control. And then off of that control, there's this baseball data object that I just mapped. And that baseball data object maps to the managed object. So the search method we expose off of it is what we're calling, and we're passing in the value of the text box. So now if we run this, we should be able to go filter this. So if I want to see every player that has a Z in his name, we can go do a search. Gives us back a lot of Zs. If I want to go just filter it down to Felix, I can go do that. So there you go. Basically, we have HTML driving your managed application, and you can go back and forth between them. Thanks. And again, just to prove that all of this stuff is cross-platform, we'll go ahead and open up Firefox. We'll put in our URL. We'll run it in Firefox. We can go do a search in Firefox, search for Mr. Player Young, filter it down. Same application running in Firefox. We want to run it in the Mac, too. Let's switch over to the Mac. Let's fire up Safari and go to our application link. Same application, progress bar coming down, and we have no chart. Try this again. Well, you know, I think there's only one thing for us to do then. We should move on to our next topic. Mac debugging. Okay, so you saw Mac debugging in the keynote. And you know, Scott said it wasn't easy to do, and he's right. It wasn't easy to do, to get all this stuff working. So everything that you need to get going is available with you as part of the downloads I mentioned in part 1. So what do you actually have to do Mac debugging? Well, you know, Mac debugging allows you to, with your Visual Studio machine, attach to the Mac to the Safari or Firefox process and actually be able to debug that process remotely. It's kind of like debugging Windows processes remotely, except it's a Mac, right? Same thing. The one requirement is that you have to have a debugger proxy installed on the Mac. We got to have something to connect to, right? Pretty obvious. The proxy is available with the Visual Studio Alpha add-in for Silverlight. It's available once you've installed all the Visual Studio pieces in this directory that I just referenced, Visual Studio 9, Silverlight, Mac, Intel. So you get that proxy. There's a document inside that same directory that walks you through what you need to do to get it set up. That's pretty much all you got to do. So if we go back to our Silverlight app here on the Mac, we're just going to go ahead and stop Safari. And then we're going to go ahead and start our proxy, the little command line. It just ran one command line here to core CLR debug proxy /d. That starts up the proxy. We'll just put it down here in the corner. Go ahead and start Safari. Let's make this guy a little bit smaller so we can see the proxy. And now if we start our application, probably you can't see, but basically what happened is the proxy said, oh, I noticed that there's now a process running managed code on this guy. I should probably pay attention to that process. So now if we flip back to our development machine, we can go to Visual Studio, and we'll go ahead and do Tools, Attach to Process. We'll pick our aptly named Core CLR Remote Cross-Platform Debugging option. Type in the name of the Mac, SLMac1. And you can see this is all the list of all the processes on the Mac. And here's Safari, which is the process we actually want to debug. You can see this type column has Core CLR Remote in it. That means anything with that value in this column is going to have managed code running in it to it that we could actually attach to. So I can go ahead and click Attach to that. And then we're trying to figure out why our app doesn't work. So let's put a breakpoint right here, an initialized component. And I'm just going to go back. I'm not going to flip. I'm going to the back of the Mac, and I'm just hitting refresh in Safari. And there you go. I hit a breakpoint on this machine. So now I can just step through this app, try to figure out what's going on. Let's go step, step. Everything seems to be working OK so far. Call the web service, show progress, chart that data to players, next page. Mac optimization, that looks a little bit fishy. Let's step into that. Let's see. Have fun. Nick, you know anything about this? OK, so basically we're using the HTML integration to find out the platform of the browser. If the platform contains a Mac, chart opacity 0. OK, yeah, that's a good one, Mac. Good one, Nick. OK, so let's fix this guy up. Let's just validate that that's the right value. Let's go to our immediate window here, and let's just change it on the fly. Chart.opacity equals 1, so we can actually see it. Hit return. Let's flip us back to the Mac. You can see there's Safari, which doesn't do anything because it's attached. But I just hit F5 here to let it go. There you go. We're running. We fixed our particular Mac bug. Thanks. Now, interesting story, because this kind of bug in here is about the only way we hope, and it's our goal, that you're going to get different behavior between the Macs. Interestingly, you know the top banana application, that fancy video slider thing that we saw as part of the keynote? Very first time we tried that on the Mac, didn't work at all. We were kind of depressed, right? Like we thought we were building this cross-platform platform, was doing pretty good. So we started debugging it. You know what the problem turned out to be? They were using our very cool HTML DOM integration feature to read a property out of the DOM and act on it. And it turned out that property in the two DOMs gives back a different value on IE compared to Safari on the Mac. So you have to be a little bit careful of that when you're integrating with the DOM, because you're getting back into those differences of behavior. So we fixed that, worked great in the Mac, and the rest is history. OK. So, other features that we're not really going to be talking about today, but that you should probably be aware of in the .NET managed space, dynamic languages. So I've shown you VB, I've shown you C#. We have the new dynamic languages feature, very cool. You can use JavaScript, Python, Ruby, VB script. So there's lots of things coming in this space. There'll be some talks that I'll point you out for this. App services. These are some new features that you may not be used to from the full framework. Things like being able to do real isolated storage in a safe way. Things like being able to have a safe file open dialog where you can actually access the file that's being opened before it gets posted back to the server, and a collection of other ones. And then the ASP.NET integration pieces I spoke about as well. These are all the other kind of big feature areas that make up the managed code support that we have in the alpha. There are some other ones that we're working on fleshing out in more detail. There are some, you should definitely consider other sessions. These are the ones that I would recommend that have related stuff. So the dynamic language session is right after this one, the Just Glue It dynamic languages in Silverlight session. And then developing ASP.NET AJAX controls with Silverlight and extending the browser programming model with Silverlight. Those two are also very good talks that dive in more depth about ASP.NET integration and some of the application services that I talked about. The deep dive into media integration will dive more into what it really means to use media as part of Silverlight. And then there's a talk on actually building e-commerce applications with ASP.NET and Silverlight together. So we've shown you a lot of things over the course of the last session. There's a lot of different pieces. Don't think by any means that the alpha that we have today is the product that we're shipping, it's done. We've made a lot of progress on this. The lower level pieces, the core CLR, the base types, those are very, very far along. The framework stacks on top of that, we're working on fleshing them out. We took our first pass over it. We think we have a lot of really good stuff. It's been pretty easy because we have the precedent of the .NET framework that we're just sucking them from into Silverlight. But we're not done. We know we need more features. We know we need input text. We know we need actual UI controls instead of just a control framework. There's a whole set of features we're continuing to work on. So really the call to action for this, download all the bits. Everything you've seen here is real. I haven't skipped any kind of magical steps. You can play around with this today. There's lots of different samples you can play around with. There's a sample pack up on the web that has a bunch of source code example. I can go somewhere on my machine here. I've got the sample pack actually downloaded. So we can come in here and you can download and run the chess app. And let me tell you, when Scott ran this, I was definitely back in the back and I'm going, please C# win, please C# win, just to make absolutely certain. But the chess app's there for you to play with. We've got a Scribbler application. It's kind of cool. It's like basically a little text editor, so we can come in here and pick a color and just start, drawing some stuff. We can come in and, that's not very good. Go ahead and delete it, get rid of it. There's another application to play around with. The DLR console that you saw. We can have the Python version of that. This one is kind of a pretty big sample, actually. There we go. You can come in here and you can poke at this, see how it works. This is basically the demo that you saw earlier today. We can play around with that. Let's just actually go back, show you any of the others. And then my personal, there's a video library here. There's just a bunch of apps to go play around with, see what you can do. And the best part about this is you have all the source code for this. My personal favorite application, though, would have to be our clock. And it may not look very exciting, but let me tell you, this particular sample was the Hello World version that we used. And the first time we got the managed code plus the XAML all run in the browser with a small package, there was a big, cheer when the clock spun. So, and every day, in our war team, we go through it, kind of validate, that all of our builds are still good. And every day the clock spins, and when the clock doesn't spin, it's a very bad day. So play around with it. Let us know what you think, what features you like, what you don't like. Hey, there's a feature in the framework that's not there that you just think we got to pull in. Let us know what that is. Post up on the forums. And with that, since we didn't leave time for questions at the end of part 1, I promised you I'd leave some time at the end of this. I'm going to open the floor to questions. Anybody else that works on Silverlight and Microsoft that wants to come up and help answer them is welcome to as well. So fire away. There's mics there, so I'd suggest going to the mics so we can all hear the questions. Go ahead.
I've got a question. If I have an HTML page set up, say, with some tables in it, and I have several Silverlight controls running,
yep.
Can I, suppose I wanted to work in sort of a master detail setup, can I get the objects in one of the controls to communicate with the objects in the other control?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question about what the unit of isolation is for managed Silverlight applications. That's not an area that we've fully completed building out. The way that it works in the alpha is each of those controls is going to be isolated to its own domain. We're going to have a model where we're going to allow controls to share domains, which would allow for exactly the type of state sharing that you're talking about. And if you're more interested in that, Stefan Schakow has a talk later today. He would be the absolute expert to engage in that conversation with. Or actually, it might be Wednesday. Forget. All right. Next.
My question is regarding the WCF and, interop. Is that in the alphabets or is that forthcoming?
The HTML interop?
No, the SOAP and WCF calls that you demoed.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is the WCF calls that I made were actually using JSON serialization. So you can do JSON serialization between ASMX and WCF call and the SVC WCF model today. That's in the alpha. SOAP serialization for either scenario is not. That's coming.
Okay, and just a clarifying question. All of the samples that you showed today with the baseball app, everything was running on the client, right? There was no server-side stuff except for the service.
The only code that was running on the service here, on the client here, were the web services that I was calling.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, I got a couple questions. First one is, will Silverlight 1.0 be backward compatible when Silverlight 1.1 comes out? So all the JavaScript type applications that we would create today.
Yeah. So our goal is to have a very, 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 very binary compatible version of Silverlight. In fact, the 1.1 alpha has a complete exact snapshot of the bits that's in the 1.0 beta. So yes, our goal is to do exactly that.
Okay. Second question I got, for the HTML integration where you're making calls from JavaScript to the to the managed code.
Yep.
Can we expect IntelliSense in that?
Can you expect IntelliSense for the JavaScript scenarios?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting question. Actually, we've done a bunch of work to make our JavaScript IntelliSense story much better, and I'm actually not positive whether we think we're going to be able to go do that. If you send me an email, I know exactly the right guys to go ask that question about whether we're going to be able to go do. So actually, anybody that wants to send me an email, I should throw this up there. It's has questions.
First slide.
Was it on the first slide?
I think so.
Yeah, there we go. Anybody wants to send me an email with a question I can't answer, send it to me. I'll follow up with you.
Last question. The Mac debugging is really cool.
Yep.
But for developers like us that are implementing Silverlight, why would we need that feature?
Why would you need that feature? Well, remember the story I told you about the top banana not working because it was doing HTML interop and wasn't quite working?
Yeah.
That feature makes finding those types of things a lot easier. The goal is, though, you shouldn't need the feature very often.
That's what I mean. I would feel that that's something that, no offense, but should be your responsibility.
Yep, absolutely agree. Yep.
Quick question. What are the basic things that I need to download so that I can run Silverlight 1.0 with JavaScript and work and create my first application?
With JavaScript, you need less. So do you want JavaScript or just managed? Or you want
Managed code 1.1.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So here's what you need. You need the Silverlight Alpha. You need the Visual Studio tool. You need the add-in for Visual Studio. And then optionally, if you want to use Expression, you can install the Expression preview. And then if you want to play around with Silverlight plus ASP.NET, you can install the ASP.NET Futures preview.
They're distributing a version of Expressions right now in the sandbox. Is that something that I can use?
Yep, there's CDs available for that. The 1.0 that shipped, to be clear, the Expression 1.0 that shipped doesn't target this. There's a separate preview of Expression that targets Silverlight.
Okay.
All of this stuff, if you just go to silverlight.net, there's a Get Started with Silverlight link. Got everything you need.
So just that hyperlink should do.
Yep, silverlight.net.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, you talked about the pay or play feature, being able to download other parts of the framework. Is system.data included in that? And then how do you envision that working?
It's a good question. I don't know yet. For all of the class libraries at the top, we haven't fully finished figuring out which pieces will be available, which ones won't be. So here's my question: Do we need system.data for the 1.1 release? That would be your feedback. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just looking at the code samples you were showing, I'm not sure if this is just for simplicity, but I noticed that you weren't wrapping your streams with a using statement. And I was wondering if there's any kind of new issues there with regard to garbage collection and disposable patterns and stuff like that.
I can answer that. We've put a lot of effort into making sure that the memory model is exactly what you've come to expect with managed code, that if you're not using the object, it automatically gets garbage collected. And so I won't say there's never a memory leak because it's possible to write managed code that accidentally holds on to data, but that should be exactly what you've come to expect from C# and other managed languages.
Thanks.
The scriptable functions, can I access the session objects from within that function?
Can you add what objects?
Session, the objects in the session.
Well, the interesting thing about this is that there is no session because this is all running on the client in the browser, not running on the server where there's a session. So that's the nice thing about this is that there's no, is that the session you mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the nice thing about this is all running the client, you don't need to track state like you do on the server because it's just all one process, one code running straight away. Make sense?
Okay.
A simple question. Is it multi-threading?
Sorry, what was that?
Is it multi-threading?
Is it multi-threaded? Is Silverlight multi-threaded? Yeah, so the async support falls in kind of a couple categories. We have built-in async support for a number of features like networking, where we just do the multi-threading for you. There's some low-level system.threading APIs that are common in the framework that are available. We're still working on finishing the factoring of those APIs. And then there's a set of middle ground APIs for doing asynchronous stuff without having to actually deal with threads that we're planning to move forward into Silverlight that we just haven't implemented yet.
Thanks.
Right. Can you do a modal dialog box from within Silverlight?
We don't currently have any built-in support for modal dialogues. What you can do is you can create an overlay element and put that on top of the rest of your application. I guess I actually had coded that up for the app and didn't have time to show that trick.
But would the browser clip it?
Would the browser?
Would it be clipped to the rectangle of the Silverlight application?
Yes, the plan is that you could do that. That would clip to from the browser perspective. It's all one window.
I see. Thank you.
What's the timeline for the 1.1 release?
So in terms of timeline, 1.0 is in beta today. 1.0 is shipping this summer. 1.1 is in alpha available today. And we're not really ready to talk about when 1.1 is going to be shipping. So I can't comment on that specifically.
For somebody who developed a WPF application, how much of that code can be reused in a Silverlight, in a website, or just a desktop database-oriented application? Like, grosso modo, like, what would be the percentage of the code that can be reused?
Well, so I think the interesting thing there is, which version did you write first? Did you write your Silverlight version, or did you write your, for lack of better word, server and or client? I forget which one you asked. If you wrote for the big platform first, there is the chance you used an API that doesn't exist in Silverlight. If you write in Silverlight, the goal here is that it will be extremely compatible. Just pick up the code, recompile it, maybe fix 1 or 2 bugs, because nothing ever works without zero hassle whatsoever. That's just not real life. But it should be an extremely efficient process to port an application from Silverlight to the full client stack or server stack, depending on which you're trying to do.
Yeah, it really comes down to what percentage of your code uses the piece that we didn't bring to Silverlight. And it's really hard to say in any kind of exact percentages what that would be at this point.
I have a question. You showed us how to make a call to a managed method from JavaScript.
Yep.
Can you go the other way?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, in our little bug that Nick put in, he was using the HTML DOM wrappers to actually read what type of browser it was from the HTML DOM. And you absolutely can go the other way. Yep.
Among other things you can return from a web service, there is a data set. Do you guys plan to re-implement the system data namespace within Silverlight so you can deserialize data sets and use them in
Yeah, so I guess that was a similar question came up a few minutes ago. We're not really finished completely deciding all the refactoring for those namespaces. So I guess my question would be to you, do we need to do data set before we ship 1.1, or could we ship 1.1 without data set on the client?
I like data set.
Fair enough.
I guess I realize that this works on the later browsers, but what do the earlier browsers see, basically? I mean,
what do the earlier browsers see?
Yeah, I mean, what?
So, basically, there's 2 types of browsers, right? There's the browsers that are on our supported list, in which case the functionality that we just showed you is going to work exactly the same in all of the supported browsers. And there's browsers that aren't in the supported list because maybe they're too early of a version, in which case I think the JavaScript basically detects and says, hey, this is not a valid version of Silverlight. So instead of saying like get Silverlight, it'll say, we're sorry, it doesn't work. I forget what the exact wording text icons are, but that's basically what it does.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep.
What's the target download size for 1.1?
Our target download size is as small as we can humanly make it. Personally, and don't take any of this stuff as verbatim, we're currently 4.2. I would be shocked if we got any bigger before we RTM. I think most of the growth is smaller.
Have you guys been using any testing tools in your own internal stuff? I'm kind of wondering if I saw you said the reflection libraries seem to be built in. Is there any potential concern with being able to have a version of, say, in-unit or team system testing or anything like that working against your Silverlight class libraries?
What would be the risk that you would be worried about in that case?
Nothing in particular. I'm just wondering if you can then run, instantiate this Silverlight version of the runtime as a unit test. Is that something that would then have to run in a browser for your unit tests, or I didn't know if you guys had already been playing around with that sort of thing.
It's basically the same thing as any type of browser plugin. Like whatever it takes to run the browser and instantiate it is what you can go do. So we should talk more. I think we need to talk more about your scenario to understand a little bit better before I can answer it. Looks like we need to wrap it up. I'll take one more question.
So you showed calling managed code from JavaScript. Is there going to be the ability to go the other way around and call JavaScript from managed code?
You can go both ways, absolutely. Okay. Yep, absolutely. All right, so thank you very much. Nick and I will stick around if you have any more questions.